Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Coast to Coast Combat Hour. I'm your host, Matthew Hawkins. And as always, I'm joined by my co host, Ed Carbajal. This week, we have the pleasure of bringing on a couple of the OGs of the sport, the guys that I got into this podcast to have a chance to interview, Gary, the Iron Bear Myers, and Tom, Big Cat Erikson. Thank you guys for making some time. This is really special for me to have a chance to speak to you guys.
Oh man, my pleasure, man. Sorry I had to make you work for it. Anything that's worth it's hard to get. So I had to play a little bit hard to get.
Hey, you went 40 minutes with Bustamante. I only took like 3, right? So
yeah. That's one of my that I got two things I say are recognizable in my career, and that's one of them. I fought in one of the longer, I say top 5, top 10, top 5. I can only think of one other fight that was longer, and that was Hoist and oh my gosh,
Sakuraba.
But yeah, my fight with Bustamante, and then fighting in the Tokyo Dome in front of 50 whatever thousand was pretty cool. So yeah, two really neat little milestones that I've touched in my career, etc. Look, I didn't have all the knockouts, all this, all that, but done a few little interesting things in the sport. That's for sure.
Definitely the case. So let's just kind of go chronologically here for MMA world. You guys were both wrestling savants, had great runs in the wrestling world, amateur. Then about 95 rolls around. They're interested in having you compete, Tom, in UFC 10 initially, correct? And then Gary, you got into the penthouse world of extreme fighting.
Right.
How I don't. You guys can take this how you want it, but how was the transition? And Gary, I know you spoke on our chat about your street fights, Tom, so you can kind of go on that as well. How was the transition from the amateur wrestling to I can kill somebody in a cage now legally, essentially?
So fighting in the streets was obviously how I got started in fighting on pay-per-view, because my coach out in Arizona, Dan Payne from Embry-Riddle, was like, man, I hear a lot about you street fighting. He puts in a tape of Hoist Gracie won and says, you think you could do this? I'm like, hell yeah, I can do that. Because the same rules applied in the streets that applied in the cage. I'm like, how hard can it be? And number one, I was like, these guys are horrible on takedowns. All I need to do is get the takedown, and that's all I would do in the streets is make sure I had the takedown. Once I was in the mount, it was over. So I didn't think it was the only thing was, I think my adrenaline was more rushed back then. Like I was fired up, but it seemed to translate pretty easy for me because there was no rules. But as it went on over the years, there's like 32 rules. Every time they add a rule, the worse I got. So when they took my headbutts away and everything, I mean, it's metamorphosized what it is then today. But there'll never be that time in MMA when it was special. Guys that fight now, I don't know so much that they would enjoy how we had to, get soccer kicked in the face and, headbutted, but just standing there and your head gets split wide open like I did to the Oklahoma wrestler, one of my fights at the Ponce Training Center. We never even hit the ground. I was like, this guy's an Oklahoma wrestler. I probably need to stop this on our feet. So I just grabbed the back of his head and just cracked his skull wide open. So, as people might enjoy the fighting now, they probably wouldn't have enjoyed it when Tom and I started, because it was a lot rougher and more chances to lose quicker and more brash. I mean, now there's a lot of technique to this, a lot of thought process. Back then, I'd like to think there was not much thought process. But I'm sure that, I've watched some of it, and a lot of methodical fighters that still survived in the beginning, like Hoist Gracie and stuff, with a style that nobody knew. I didn't know what jiu-jitsu was with my first pay-per-view fight. I had no clue. And, as I fought Conan in the finals, if they had to stop that fight, he doesn't get up. I mean, like, they stopped the fight, check his cut, and then they start us back on our feet. When I was telling Tom today, I was in a podcast, like, you realize you should have started back in the mount. And I was like, yeah. I didn't realize that for 20 years. Like, I should have probably said something in, but as you're fighting, you're getting tired. You don't think about, you need your corner to be thinking about those kind of things. But I fought a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, which is Conan, but I didn't know a zero lick of jiu-jitsu. I mean, now I know how to get out of the front choke. I didn't then. And then Tom is he's a world-class heavyweight. So I'm sure he walked right into this and was very comfortable because just like the Kevin Randleman fight, I don't know if I ever took that fight. That guy, I always thought Randleman was like one of the most prestigious like bodies of a fighter you could have. Like he was physically very scary. Tom's like, I'm taking the fight. They try to talk him out of the fight. He goes, no, I need to make money too. I'm going to take that fight. And Tom went out there and put it to him. You saw the results.
Yeah, I mean, you speak on that fight. That's Brazil Open '97. I mean, you fought at Martial Arts Reality Super Fighting. That's the first pay-per-view, which for me was very cool because a couple years ago I got a chance to go out to Alabama to go to a BKFC, the Bare Knuckle event, and it was actually at the arena where you competed at for Mars.
Birmingham?
Yeah, in Birmingham, and where UFC I think 19 was. So for me as a kind of historian, that was very cool to be in the same building as some of that stuff went down.
Well, if you had the good fortune of doing that, and I wonder if you had the good fortune of also eating at the Applebee's that was right across the street or relatively close to that, because that's where I got my nickname, the Big Cat. Literally, the day before, we're eating there with my team, Chip Borelli and a guy named Bruce Holst, a couple guys I trained with, help me get ready, and I needed a nickname, and we couldn't think of a nickname, and we're this, we're that. And it's just like, well, you move like a damn cat, let's call you Puma, let's call you this. They couldn't figure it out. So then for some reason, Big Cat was kind of born right there at that Applebee's or Chili's or whatever it was, just outside that in Birmingham. And that's where a nickname is. And I kind of it's kind of frustrating, so to speak. I was out in Vegas last weekend. I had some guys competing, et cetera, in a wrestling event. And, hey, what's up, Big Cat? What's up, Big Cat? I'm like, you know what? I wrestled my career. I was an alternate on 3 Olympic teams, traveled to 3 Olympic games, Seoul, Barcelona, Atlanta. I've competed in the World Submission Championships. All these different things. Didn't know a damn thing about me, but now I got a nickname called the Big Cat, and everybody knows me as the Big Cat. I just kind of like ticks me off just a little bit. Like, dude, I was tough before I had the nickname.
I got a question for you, gentlemen.
Sure.
Just because you kind of touched on it, Gary, when you started talking about how you jumped into the sport. So if you could answer first and then Tom second, when you watch the sport now, because you said like some of the rules, you mentioned the rules and how some of the people react to stuff that happens in the cage now versus it was kind of commonplace back when you guys fought. So when you watch the sport now and you see, somebody, I don't know, like if a headbutt happens and they walk around for the 5 minutes or whatever it is, are you guys sitting at home watching like, come on, bro, because you've actually been through that full force? What's your take on it when you see stuff like that happen?
I guess for me, it's the growing shots. It's like you're wearing a cup. I mean, and like I hate when they sell that. I hate it when they sell that. Like, like you'll watch the replay. Some of them you'll see that are direct, but I mean, I don't know if you ever wore a cup, but it's pretty protective. And I think they sell that too much. I will tell you this. I used to think, these guys get poked in the eyes are selling that too. But when they show the replay, I don't know why they even allow it. I don't even know why they're not deducting a point when these guys are taking their finger straight into the guy's face.
Mm-hmm.
This last UFC or your UFC before, you could, right into the eyes. I don't even know if it's a Holloway fight or which was an awesome fight, but they don't. I don't know why they aren't taking a point. Because why are you leading with your fingers instead of your fist?
Mm-hmm.
I don't get that part. Mm-hmm. Tom could have separated on that. I don't know.
No, I don't think so. I mean, yeah. That look, are the fighters better now? Yeah, sure, most definitely. Their skill set, for the most part, their skill sets are better. A little bit more refined. There's probably a tad better transition in the fight game. Punching, striking, transition to takedowns, etc. Better. But in saying that, I think the toughness, there's no toughness. The guys aren't tougher. So you get poked in the eye, and guys will, LeBron it up and dive to the canvas and grab their eye and stuff. Look, Fabricio got gouged. I've got this on my phone somewhere where he got, a 2-knuckle deep eye gouge, which is legit. But, other than that, some of these guys are like, come on, man. just get in there and fight. Yeah, just a little disappointing. Hey, I don't mean to jump around, but I wanted to back up and you talk about, first getting into the fight. I was born and raised in the south side of Chicago. Uh, yeah, it's better. I've been in worse neighborhoods. I've been in a lot better neighborhoods. And saying that, I felt I was a pretty tough guy. Had a few scraps here and there. The neighborhood I was in I was probably the minority in the neighborhood I was in, which tells you, it was either Hispanic, black, whatever. And I was one of the minorities. In saying that, giving that kind of background, I wasn't sure how tough I was when it came to fighting. And I tell you, the best one was probably that my event down in Brazil, and the one before that, I think the WWE or World, gosh,
WFF, World Fighting
WFF, yeah,
Federation.
World Fighting Federation. I kind of got tagged a little bit there, but it wasn't until I got down to Brazil where I got tagged by Pantera Negri, and then Randleman definitely clipped me. If you ever watch that fight again, it's not that long, but you ever watch that fight again, he throws that big looping, I call it a little bolo punch. He hits me, he hits me flush with it, and you see my legs just kind of like whoa, and then it's just like, yo, man, get the F over here. Come here, let's go. And that was probably the most refreshing thing in my fight career, knowing I could take that shot, walk through a decent shot, and keep fighting. Look, we have guys, even guys today that fight, but we had guys, a bunch of those wrestlers that once they got hit, they did a lot of duck and diving. They shrunk up and they started looking to dive and get to a leg attack, and start eating knees and things like that. So, yeah, I wasn't sure how tough I was until, definitely a solid, okay, and then ironically enough, that's kind of when the fights kind of started. Oh, that's the matchup we don't get. Heck, if I would have lost probably in either one of those fights down in Brazil, I probably would have had a fight over in Japan against Marco Huas. But because I walked through both those fights as easy as I did, Huas didn't want any part of me.
Yeah, no, that's refreshing to actually hear you say that. Like I said, I trained with Mark Hall in the 90s, who was a much smaller. He was a 190-pound fighter when there was no under 200-pound weight class. So he always kind of came off as like, the smaller guy who had to always be tough, and he would never admit, it's probably what kind of something you said. So to see a guy your size go, man, I don't know if I was built for this. And then, I mean, there's no better way to find out than stepping in that cage with Kevin Randleman. I mean, hell, you mentioned his body. I've done some minor writing in my life, and the stuff I always commented on was through the internet, seeing from the Brazil stuff, the Randleman, like fighting Universal Vale Tudo, and then Mark Kerr and Vanderlei Silva. And those three guys always stood out to me like, whoa. And it was just because of the specimens that they were, where you looked at them and you always thought like, these guys are like superheroes. Well, then you come along, Tom, and I mean, I'll say it. I know you've said it in the past. You would have been the UFC heavyweight champion had you come to the UFC between UFC 10 and UFC 30. You knocked out Kevin Randleman, who was the champ. And honestly, other than maybe Rico Rodriguez getting lucky with you in some kind of submission, I don't see anybody that you would have had trouble with. Pete Williams, Mo Smith, love the guy, but you take him down and you smother the shit out of him. So I always thought that was interesting, and it was because of your size that the UFC really never allowed you to come in there. How frustrating was that? In your mind, you had to be going, man, I'm the best goddamn heavyweight in the world, and I got to, and the UFC wants to put a weight class and keep me out of this stuff, and fighters want to dodge me. How frustrating was that for you?
Yeah, Gosh, yeah, man, I didn't buy into all of that. Yeah, it's a little frustrating, but I was fighting. I went down to Brazil. I went over in Japan. I kind of started making those things happen, and we're making cash money over in Japan. They were handing you bricks of hundreds. I mean, that's a pretty cool thing. And then you just had to divvy it up within your posse to get it all back in the country. That's the one thing about the Chipperellis. I think that they were ahead of the game in terms of they weren't necessarily for the big time titles and things like that. Those are nice, and obviously they can dictate some different things down the line. But I think Monty kind of screwed it for us, so to speak, because he had so many of his fighters, Milicic guys, so many guys in there. He had all the weight classes covered. And I think the one smart thing that Dana and crew did, they're like, no, we're not letting fighters take over this UFC. Where I'm not going to fight this guy. I'm not going to fight this guy. They had Tim Sylvia. They had Matt Hughes. Matt Hughes is about the toughest SOB you can get. But you had some guys that are locked in there. And I don't think that Dana and those guys wanted that to happen. And oh, by the way, we had this guy named Randy Couture that was fighting with the Raw team that was over in the UFC taking care of business. So for me to get over there and having the stranglehold the weight class, like Milicic did, you don't hear a lot about it, but how you have it, I'm not going to fight that fight unless I get paid this. Well, people want to see it. Well, pay. That was the early days of them kind of blackmailing. You didn't hear it that much, but he did it. And that's one of the things that Dana and crew weren't going to let happen. So I felt, for me, I had to go to different places. My goal was to be, a bad dude, feared around the world, etc. And the UFC was the gig, but that wasn't the place, man. If you wanted to do it, you had to do it in Japan or Brazil. And I chose to do it in both, and that's why I took events in both those countries and wanted to kind of make my bones in both those countries. And I think it worked out in the long run. Did I get the titles, get this, that, and another thing? No. But, here I am, 100 years later, I'm doing your podcast, and people are still curious about my big fat ass. So it's kind of interesting.
I have something to say about Dana White. I wonder, people don't talk about this to this day, but he said something years ago when he, maybe a little bit into his career at UFC, he said, the day I got to start negotiating with managers over money and stuff is the day I quit. I wonder what he thinks now of that statement. Like, he had to have run into managers that have haggled over money and he said he'd never do it. So I'm wondering how he feels about that now, because he said he quit if he ever had to haggle. If he had to get down to the level and deal with managers. He has to do that all the time now.
Yeah.
Just see how he has to deal with John Jones. He has to hope the dude stays out of jail.
But he was willing to quit when they were like $10 million in the hole. Now that he's a billionaire, he ain't walking away for shit. He'll negotiate all day long.
I just want to see if he was a man of his word. That's all.
Real quick, or go ahead.
If there's something you said, Tom, that I want to get Gary's take on too, because you said, like, when you were fighting and competing, and I mean, obviously there was a financial reward and a motivation when you compete in professional sports, regardless of what it is. But when you guys did it, I mean, I know Japan paid better, but you said your goal was to be the goal, the thing that motivates you, because you want to test yourself and see what you said. You want to see if I was a bad dude. Gary, I just wanted to see what are your thoughts on, like, when you look back on what drove you to compete back in those days? Was it the same thing, just to kind of for the glory of combat and to see who's the greatest?
Short answer, yes. I felt that was it. And there's one thing I knew that most people didn't know when we were talking about wrestling. I knew that one day all these world-class wrestlers, I was a wrestler, but Tom will tell you there's levels to wrestling. And I knew I needed to get in now and quick before this big rush of Olympic wrestlers and world-class wrestlers were in there and make my mark. And I'd said that back then. I said, I got to get in now. And so when somebody said, you want to fight on pay-per-view? I said, absolutely. Who am I fighting? Well, your first fight's kickboxer. Perfect. Who's your second fight? Jiu-jitsu guy. If you win that one, perfect. Because I didn't respect either sport. I didn't know either sport. So it was, for me, it was like, oh, let's go do this. I mean, it's like a forfeit or a buy in wrestling to me. Now, if you say, Gary, fight a wrestler, I'm like, who am I fighting? Which wrestler is it? So, I just wanted to fight. I didn't care. I mean, I didn't care. I never turned down a fight. I know Tom's never turned down a fight. Never once did somebody call me. Monty Cox, I did a lot of his shows. Never once did he call and I turned down a fight like Rich Franklin. I had no idea who he was. I didn't care. I just wanted to fight. Like, I already was supposed to fight a guy named Dowd out of Florida. He canceled. He says, you want to fight Rich Franklin? Yeah, I don't care. Let's fight. I mean, so that's what I walked into that day. But I'll tell you the difference between yesterday and today. We used to train as we thought as wrestlers. Now these guys have had 20 years, or 25 years, whatever, to learn jiu-jitsu. And Tom's talking about the stand-up. the mount. They've had all this time to know what we didn't know and didn't train. I mean, I like my whole time in my career, I fought for about 16 years. I started in February 94. I never once, but before the Rich Franklin fight, worked my hands. Not one time. And the only reason I worked my hands with Rich Franklin because a month before, I had a good training camp. I had 3 months to train. First time I ever had 3 months. Tore my groin muscle out pretty bad a month before I fought Rich Franklin. And I switched to trying to box. So when I fought, I've never shot once because I took the fight just because of the money. I wouldn't have turned down the money and couldn't shoot. So I thought, well, I'll try to learn hands. So try to do that like when you're, I'm like almost 40 when I take that fight, I guess. 195, I'm about 37. I don't know. I'm late in life. But, boxing something and wrestling something you should learn as a kid, especially boxing, the movement, you just don't pick up boxing and become great. Randy Couture is great at boxing, but little do people know he did train in the Army in boxing. I was in the Army. Couture was in the Army. He boxed a lot while he was in the Army. And I don't know if many people know that, but that's how his skill set was so good. And I lived with the All-Army boxers out of Fort Hood, Texas, but I never took advantage of training with those guys. I got in the ring with them one time ago. Oh, this ain't for me. That was like 1985. So, but Couture, I think, had a little start on his hands than most people think.
Yeah, and he was just so good at controlling up against the cage. He could dirty box all day long. I mean, it was.
Yeah, when I go to train, I'm like, I'm still in wrestling practice back in the day. Not like I'm in a fight game. I'm still hitting the doubles, still wrestling. Now it's, you got a 2-hour practice in boxing, a 2-hour Muay Thai. I got to go here for my jiu-jitsu class. I mean, it's every day. And we were working jobs. I mean, a full-time job. I mean, I didn't have the luxury of just going to practice. I had a family and everything.
Now, you guys, I'm the West Coast, so I was out here during the early kind of King of the Cage days. You guys are prior to that. You guys had Extreme Challenge. You had that stuff that opened some doors for you specifically, Gary. You had, you fought in the ones of a lot of events, which is both of you guys. When you're in the single digits of any of these events now that went up to 300, 400, 500 events. I mean, it says you were there obviously in the beginning. In the beginning, as Tom had mentioned. You fought in Brazil, you fought in the U.S. You kind of had to do a world tour. Like I said, I know Mark Hall did that. He fought in Brazil, fought in Japan, and then obviously had his little run in the UFC in the early days. Watching one of your other podcasts, Gary, you mentioned some shenanigans in the Waleed Ismail fight, making weight and stuff that went on in those countries.
Making weight twice for one world title fight. I mean, I'm dead. I got to wait. I went from maybe 260. I don't know. I went down to 199. I fly in. I'm dead. I got nothing in my mouth. I mean, I'm dry. I get off the plane. I'm still overweight. Daryl Golart saved my life. Another famous Greco-Roman wrestler who fought in Brazil. He got into sauna with me. I got on a bike. He put a blanket over me. We're in the sauna, and I'm trying to get this last few pounds off before 10 a.m. So, because I just land at 10 a.m. So anyways, I'm training. Golar's with me. He's got to lose some weight. He's going 180 or something. Anyways, we get to the weigh-in at 6 o'clock at night. I don't see Valish. I weigh in. I don't see him anywhere. And I go to my room. They said, oh, you made weight, 199. So I go to my room, and there's no food around. Like you just have this food these guys can eat. Now I ate McDonald's, drank a gallon of milk, whatever. I ate quarter pounder of cheese and just trying to get some food in my body. And they called my room and said, hey, Valish says he's not fighting unless he sees you weigh in. So I go down, and I'm 10 pounds over. I go back to work. 10 o'clock at night, I finally make weight again. Daryl helps me again, gets in the sauna with me. I mean, this guy's got to fight for the tournament lightweight title of the world the next night. He's still helping me. And I finally make weight again. Guess who doesn't show up at 10 o'clock? Valish Ismail. Doesn't show up again. I make weight. And Battarelli is the promoter, and he's the referee. I make weight again. He's not there. I said, I'm done. I just want you to know I'm done. I mean, you don't want me to fight because they told me I wouldn't fight if I had to make weight again. So I was 11 and over. I was 210. I go, I'm done. I made weight. I'm done. If you got to do this again, I'm done. I flew a long way. I get it, but I'm done. And so he didn't show up for 2 weigh-ins. I didn't even see him weigh in, let alone, watching me. And I didn't care.
He probably didn't weigh in. He probably never weighed in. Like I said, Mark would tell me he fought at IVC2 down there, and he got injured and told me about all the chaos that went on down there. But he loved Japan, and that's what I was kind of wanted to get to. He had some issues also with the UFC. Mark had his ups and downs, but the thing about Japan that he loved is he told me he never had to question the money. They'd hand him an envelope. He'd shake their hand, walk away, and it was always good for him. Was that your guys' experience down there? And I guess my question would be more about Brazil. Was it the opposite? Did you have problems down there getting paid, or was it Japan just the place for honesty, as much honesty as you could get in the world of fighting? Was it best in Japan?
Japan for me was always good, except for one time, and that's the one time that probably set me in a different path in terms of fighting K1 and stuff like that. I didn't do what I was told to do, and was kind of forced to do it later. So in terms of getting paid, I was worried, nervous that time. But Brazil, yeah, it was shady. I remember when I fought the Brazil 97, went down there, and I ended up flying home. Rico Chiapparelli's like, no, man, I'm staying down here until I get your money. And he stayed down there an extra 2 days and got paid, and I got my money because Rico Chiapparelli stayed down there. There was probably a 50-50 chance I wouldn't have got paid from Brazil, that Brazil Open 97 event, or paid properly, if it weren't for Chiapparelli staying down there and getting me paid. But in terms of Japan, it was all good until, like I say, that one situation, and it was a fight that they told me which put me off in a bad course. I didn't throw a fight the way I was supposed to throw a fight, and got me in trouble, but whatever.
For me, I always had problems getting paid in the States. I always had some kind of hiccup here in the United States. When I went to Brazil, I came down an elevator. Batterelli's right outside the elevator, handed me a package. I'm right front now. Pancrase in Japan was famous for just handing you the envelope right before you got on the plane. I was like, yeah, that I didn't like that, but they were always forthcoming and coming right up to you. In America, you're chasing promoters around trying to get paid. And they don't realize once you get up, catch up with them, what's going to happen, because they're like, you're going to pay me. But I never had a problem overseas. Russia, never a problem. Brought me in a room after my fight in that tournament. And the only thing I didn't like about Russia was they made me walk back from the arena. It's pitch black with my fight team. And we got to walk to the hotel. And it was pitch black. And we had this money on us. So we had to walk back to the hotel. I thought for sure we were getting jumped. And I was, quite literally looking over my shoulder the whole time, kind of scared, like, we're going to get jumped. Why would they? They're like, we don't have a ride for you back in the hotel. I'm like, you're joking. Like, we got to walk back in the dark of Russia. And I thought, it's it, boys. We're done. And we got back there. It's funny, but later that night, we got pulled over twice by the military police. And the taxi cab driver kept going down a road. I kept going, that's not the way. Because I wrestled Russia and fought in Russia a couple times. And next thing I know, military police pulling us over, checking our passports. But I hear that they like to extort you, take you back to the station. But they didn't do that. But they put their guns to our head.
Oh, wow.
And I'm just sitting there, with their gun to my head. And I'm just handing a passport. I don't even look at them. But they pull one of my guys out of the back seat. And something's wrong with his paperwork. But they eventually let us go. But I never had a problem in foreign country. Boy, here in the States, you got to chase those promoters around. They just not going to give you the money. You got to ask for it. I
think one of the things about going over and fighting in foreign countries, they were kind of just startups, so to speak. So they wanted to make sure that they treated Americans and treated certain people properly. They wanted you to come back. They wanted you to promote their event. They wanted you to talk their event up and tell people how good their event was. And if they took care of you and they paid you on time, look, it's already agreed on. It's not like we're trying to hose you for some more. But as long as they paid you properly on time and things like that, where I think they always wanted to make sure they take care of Americans, because the Americans, they have a bigger voice going back to their own country. So I always kind of like I said, I felt pretty good about that. But Brazil is unique. I mean, like I say, that not happening. I mean, like I say, that Brazil Open '97, the event was supposed to start at 8 o'clock. It wasn't until 10:30 before the first fight went off. We walked into the building, there was nobody there, and 2.5 hours later, when the first fight went off, it was packed. I mean, it was like I said, you guys have heard the stories. Brazil's a little different place, man. A little more wild west and stuff like that. Oil, grease, you name it, it all goes on down there. But they have the money for you. They just want to make you dance just a little bit to get it, but they'll make sure they get it for you.
You, Gary, you mentioned Russia, and one of our early guests on our podcast years ago was a fighter named Johnny Hughes. I think you may be familiar with him. I reached out to him to ask him a question, and he told me to ask you about wrestling USA versus the Soviets. He said you might have a story or two. Since you brought up Russia, is there anything why he would ask me to bring that up to you?
Well, when I wrestled in Russia in '90, I had a dual meet over there in Moscow, and I have the guy's name in front of me now, but said he was going to take my jacket. I had a USA Wrestling jacket on, and kept telling me he was going to take it and put it on his wall. And that match, I trained harder. I had 3-month training camp for that dual meet, and I had already had 2 dual meets in Montreal, and so that's when we hit to Moscow. But he was very confident he was going to get my jacket, and we went in overtime, and they wanted to stop the bout and say, hey, we're good. And I was like, no, I didn't travel all this way to end the tie. So we went into a couple overtime. So I ended up winning that match like 3-2, but I walked immediately over to, and his clothes were on the ground, and I immediately made a beeline to him and snatched up his jacket, which I still have today, and I'll show it before I leave this podcast. But I snatched that jacket of his country, his national jacket, and but he thought for sure, he kept on me the whole time during weigh-ins and everywhere. He was going to get my jacket after he beat me. And it just so happens that I had a game plan for that match, and it just worked out for me. But I snatched his jacket up for everybody.
That's awesome that you still have it all these years later. I mean, but that's a hell of a souvenir from the old USSR.
Oh yeah, that's the original jacket. It says CCCR, and that's Tom's era, and but that's back when they were still the Soviet Union, right? Still in Russia.
Uh-huh.
I mean, now they're fragmented, whatever. It was a great story that sometimes I tell in color, but so I've had experience there before I even went there and fought. And then one time I went back to fight, and I didn't have to. I was there to manage our Cobra from American Gladiators. He was fighting. If you notice, if you have a fight team, your fight team talks a lot of crap at the bars and everywhere else because they're not fighting. It's always so. When I tell my buddies, when I said, "Don't you ever let me corner you? Don't ever let me corner you." So during the whole time before I'm cornered, I'm talking so much crap. Get in the bar later, talking crap because I'm not the one that's put my butt on the line. And I always tell my teammates or whoever's with me, man, just keep your mouth shut. And my teammates always, talked me into a corner. Right? I had to perform well.
That's outstanding.
I got a question about something you said about the way matches are made now. I think it was Tom that kind of hinted at it, and Gary, you said something about with Dana dealing with the managers. Can you guys comment on like you're from as fighters that fought when you're looking at the sport now, and you see how you see all the news about matchmaking and contracts and stuff like that. Do you think match fights were made easier back when you guys fought more because you guys seem to want to fight more? Like because the matches were definitely better from your era versus the way matches are made now. What's your take on matchmaking now versus then?
Yeah, it's too easy to duck out of a fight now. I got a cold. I got a hangnail. I got this. Dude, man, we needed the money. I mean, for the most part, we were fighting for the money, man. We're fighting for rent money. We're fighting for this or, and some of the guys who had the bigger gyms and stuff like that, you were fighting for the gym's honor, the Militich fight system, AMC, Pancrase, out there with Human, that crew, and Maurice, and so you were fighting for that gym and their honor. Now these guys, like I say, they need and respectfully, I get it. I mean, it's good. I mean, I've had enough surgeries here, this and that, and other thing. I wouldn't wish on anybody. But in the same token, look, they got a hangnail. It fights off, man. Fights off. Can't do it. I'm not 100%. Fights off. I had a stomach virus and it's off. Well, dude, man, we want to see a fight. And you had guys like Matt Hughes, who just like I said, man, I mentioned him. That's one tough SOB, but he's just one of several that just tough guys that just got in there and just won some fights because the son of a bitch is tough.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I laid in a hospital for a week for one of my fights because I got bit by 5 recluse spiders. I just built a house in the woods, and I came home hammered, grabbed it. I don't know why I did. It was a week before one of my fights, but I did drink a lot of beer back then. But I grabbed a blanket on my garage, stood over me, and got bit like 5 times in my gut and my leg. And I laid in the hospital bed with IVs and shit for a week. Chaz Bowen came up to the hospital and says, "Hey, we're in Beech Grove, Indiana." He goes, "You going to fight tonight?" I go, "Hell yeah, I'm fighting tonight." And he goes, "Well, let's get moving a little bit. You've been laying there for 7 days." So I go down to I'm wheeling this IV bag thing and my hospital clothes, and I go down to the garage and start running sprints about 10 a.m. I didn't want to let people down. They already bought the tickets. I wasn't going to, they bought tickets to see me fight. I mean, I wasn't getting paid a lot, but these people worked hard for their money. I wasn't just not going to fight. I wanted to fight that night on a decision, but I should have been still in the hospital. They had disease control come in and see if anything else was wrong with me, but I had 5 big bites on my stomach. And I don't know if you ever know what brown recluse spiders could do to your gut. If they bite your skin. They leave holes. And I had tape all around my gut and everything, and I still went out and fought. And I mean, I've done a couple of things. I've been cut the night before fights, put stitches in, went out and fought. I mean, these guys now, if they cut their eyes open, like Tom said, if it was $1 million, $2-3 million fight, they quit. Not me. 2-3 million, I'm fighting.
Well, you guys were around. I mean, you guys were around Dan Severn and Travis Fulton and guys that fought, 4 times a weekend, nonstop. Tom, you mentioned the Brazil '97. That was also the debut for Dan Henderson. I'm assuming from your wrestling background, you guys were friendly or knew each other well back then. And did you see in Dan the success that he would eventually have and become what I mean, Dan Henderson became an all-time legend in MMA for what he did in Pride and the UFC. Did you see that early in him? Was he always that killer? Or were you kind of surprised that this little skinny kid kind of came out of here and started eventually putting people down hard with it?
I've mentioned Matt Hughes a couple times and saying how tough Matt Hughes was in the fight game. Dan Henderson was that times 2 or 3. That dude was tough. And oh, by the way, that big freaking overhand right, if he touched you with it, you're going to sleep. Doesn't matter who you are. Ask Bisping. Ask any of those guys. That guy fought Fedor. I mean, Dan, and unfortunately, obviously he paid a heavy price for it. If you know Dan, I saw him a couple of years ago, and still very friendly with him to a certain degree. That just he's a little short here and there just from the shots that he's taken, but a guy with absolutely no fear and a huge heart and would be willing to fight anybody. The only reason, he would probably have fought me, and the only reason that he didn't was the only excuse he'd probably get for not fighting me is because we're teammates, but that dude would fight anybody, man. That guy is one of our, Mount Rushmore legends. We got guys that were first. Severn was one of our first guys. Coleman, one of our first champs. Then Couture would be on that mountain. But, in terms of the overall and what the guy did in the different events and different arenas, man, Dan Henderson was just one tough hombre. Didn't care about the weight class. He was a Greco guy, so he you can't. I mean, you could probably count the number of takedowns, clean takedowns he had off a leg attacks on, 2 hands throughout his whole career. But you'd need about 10 different hands to count the knockouts there, the times he dropped somebody with that big right hand. I mean, Dan just was a tough guy. I mean, God, look, you look at what we did. I mean, the crew that we had, Real American Wrestling's a Raw team.
Mm.
You had Henderson, Matt Linland, and Couture was kind of a branch that trained out of Oregon where Linland was. And then myself and, Randy would be back up there. We had Frank Trigg on our squad a little bit, old Twinkle Toes. Now we're a referee, etc. But, man, it's just.
Matyshenko too, right? I have a picture with him wearing a Raw shirt.
The janitor, Vladdy. Which, I was on the wrestling team that gave him that nickname, but that was okay.
Yeah, I would concur with everything Tom said, man. He's one of my favorite fighters.
Yeah, I've had the play. I mean, I'm in Temecula. His gym is literally 3 miles behind me. Dan. So I've had the great.
Make sure you know what I'm talking about. A little step off on his voice, his translation and stuff like that. His wife kind of takes care of him. Definitely takes care of him. But man, you go in there, you tell him I said hello. Man,
I will
absolutely.
For sure.
Because
we've had a bunch of his fighters on this show. A lot of his young guys we bring on here. And I've had the pleasure of meeting Dan several times over the years. So when I go by there, I'll definitely say something because this is awesome to hear that about a guy that I have just tremendous respect for. I know everybody does, but to hear coming from his
great guy. Super great guy. I mean, man, not a thing that you could say negative against him, except that he fought everybody. Probably fought everybody too much. You name the guy, and then name the organization, rings, when they had that special rings event that Randy and Dan fought in and stuff like that tournament, he fought in that. I mean, he just, oh my goodness, that's just one tough, ornery SOB. And like I said, man, I for the first whatever minutes in this podcast, I've talked about, Matt Hughes and kind of sang some nice praises about him, but Henderson's him times 2 or 3. Absolutely. Dude's a stud. I wouldn't want to fight him.
That's great. What fight was there during both of your guys' careers that you wish you would have had? What's, and I know it's not for titles necessarily, but is there a fight that you just like, stylistically, like I wanted to beat that guy? I could have beat that guy. I could have been world champion. I could have made a ton of money. Was there one fight that you didn't get or that you just were never offered that you just wish you could have got?
They didn't give it to me, but I think I mentioned it earlier. Marco Huas would have loved it. King of the Streets. That's when Huas was probably at his top. That's what King, Marco Huas, which is king, and streets, etc. and in Portuguese. And then another guy that Gary had the pleasure to fight, and the gentleman is a great friend of mine. I know his son is doing great in his career as well. But Conan de Silvieri, those are 2 fights that, man, I just thought those dudes fit me perfect. I mean, I'm like, okay, these guys want to stand and bang. Well, I can take a shot. Good, check. And oh, by the way, I can take them down anytime I want to, and they're not getting up if I don't want them to. So I love both of those fights. It's those smaller jiu-jitsu guys that give you some problems. Like when I fought Murillo, heck, I rolled and I beat Roberto Travin in Abu Dhabi and back in the late 90s, etc. in the Arab Emirates. So I've got my hands on some great guys. Training with Vitor, that would have been a great matchup for me too, because Vitor, but his hands were so quick, man. I'd have to take a shot or 2 before I got in on him, because that dude had such quick hands. Early in his career, those hands were just so lightning fast. Gosh, I was training with him over in Abu Dhabi. I'm like, holy cow, this dude's a handful.
He was fearless early in his career. Before he kind of got beat up, he was just fearless. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Gary? Anybody you think of that you wish you would have got in there with?
I wish I would have fought the demons inside me and won some of the fights that I already had lined up. Listen, I got to where I was kind of done with wrestling and I was kind of tired, and I got into fighting, and I wish they had not stopped the fight in Battlecade 1. I wished I'd have went on to win that world title. He would not have got up off his back. I was going to finish that fight there. I had all the good fights. I tell people, Phyllis Lee was my manager. I had the opportunities to win some great fights, and I blew those opportunities by not good training camps, not taking them serious. I just wanted to fight. I didn't, today everything's calculated. I didn't care. I just wanted to I didn't care what shape I was in. I didn't care any of that. I just wanted to go out and fight. And I wish, it's hard for me to say who I wanted to fight. I wish I just took care of the people that were in front of me already. But I didn't. I just felt like, hey, I don't. I've been wrestling all my life. I just want to go out and fight. I don't really want to train. I knew better. I started training a little bit, crossing paths when I met Pat Miletich and them, because I think Pat Miletich was the first one, really, especially in the Midwest, to realize you need to train all the things combined. And
nobody wants to train. Everybody wants to fight, but nobody wants to train.
Right. And it's just like, I was a wrestler. I didn't feel like I needed all that. I mean, I knew I could street fight. I knew I could wrestle. What else did I need? Well, you need to learn how to stay out of submissions. You need to work on your conditioning. You need to be able to stand up in a fight if you can't get a guy down. Just some things that, if I could go back and talk to myself and go, look, this path you're going down could be more fruitful if you just concentrate on what you're doing. And I didn't do that, but I had a lot of fun. I mean, so everybody says, Phyllis Lee was your manager. She gave me the fights. I didn't take care of the opportunities I had. And that's the bottom line.
We had Chris Lytle on a couple years ago, and I mentioned Phyllis Lee to him because as a kid growing up watching the sport, I was always wondering who this lady was standing in the corner, coming out with Dan Severn with his sweat-stained shirt. And then I'd see her in the corner of everybody, and I had to do some research to eventually kind of find out how the hell did this woman, and I don't know her whole background, but how did she get so involved where she had connections in multiple countries and seemed to have every fighter in the Midwest on her Rolodex?
It's
professional
simple.
Wrestling.
Yeah, back to her professional wrestling. She, I don't know who the professional wrestler she dated in Florida. I can't remember his name, but Malenko, and she dated him, and she was already in Japan with professional wrestling. And so Al Snow, she managed Al Snow and Dan Severn. I mean, Dan can correct me, but we're friends, and they trained together. That's why Al Snow came out with him in the first UFC. But she was able to garner all these people. Now she's got Dan Severn. That's how they got me, because my wrestling coach put it in tape at UFC 1. He goes, hey, I know Dan Severn's brother. I think it's Don Severn. Is that right, Tom? Is it Don Severn?
Well, he's got several. Yeah, Rod's another one. It
was Rod. So, but the guy was in Arizona. So she called
Rod
him
from Arizona State.
Yeah, and he called Dan. He goes, well, I'm managed by Phyllis Lee. So Dan Payne he goes, can I have her number? And Dan Severn gives it to him. Next thing I know, I meet her in a cafe in northern Indiana. She goes, you think you could, I mean, this is what she said. And this is when I didn't know anything about real fighting, pay-per-view and stuff. She goes, you think you could kill somebody in the ring? I looked like, hell yeah, I could. That's the easy part. And so right after that, somehow she knew Battlecade and, John Peretti, which I'm sure Tom will talk about John Peretti in a minute, but I never met John Peretti, but I got on the show, and none of those guys knew me, and I think I surprised a lot of people. But you didn't have to have this great skill set back then. Any one skill set, you could be a good wrestler and be successful, or you could be a jiu-jitsu guy. But back then you didn't have to combine all five to be all five of the great points of this to win, and that was great for me. Like I said, every time they added a rule, I got worse. So that's how I hooked up with Phyllis Lee. I took one meeting with her. Me and my wife actually drove up and met her, and like Napanee, Indiana or something. And she just asked me one question. Like, I could kill somebody in the ring. And this is like, I say absolutely yes. And I'm laughing because I'm thinking, is that what it's going to take? I mean, I don't know anything, but of course, yes, I can do that. And she believed me. So next thing I know, I'm on pay-per-view.
So I got to ask about John Peretti, because now that you mention that, I don't know, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to him, but from an outsider watching him in the early days, I always kind of sounded like he was full of shit to me. And I don't know. Hopefully you're not friends with the guy, but what was Peretti's? I mean, the way he talked, the way he always acted like he was the smartest guy in the room, and I always kind of wondered where he came from, and I guess why he disappeared so quick.
Before Tom elaborates, I'll say this. He had been in karate and stuff, like with Judo Gene LaBelle, probably since the 70s. So he probably had a little knowledge of how this was going, and I'll let Tom finish that out.
You know, John was there early in mixed martial arts. You know, lots of people will argue with him about where who coined the moniker MMA, who did this, who did that. Look, John's a unique character, man. He's very, very confident in what he knows, what he thinks he knows, and what he knows. And as a good speaker, you want that. And John could do that. John would sell and do that. And he had a good knowledge base, and he knew the fighters. You know, I mean, when I fought for him on his contenders card, and he used to either do, Extreme or Battlecade, one of the other shows in Iowa, and John used to run those events. And for me, the business is always about respect. Whether even in wrestling, it's always about respect. You have to work pretty hard for me not to respect you, because you're going to get it, because I know how hard the sport is of wrestling. I know how hard or difficult the sport of fighting is. And, being a mixed martial artist, it's difficult. It just is. And if you got a guy that does it, even part-time, man, that he's earned a little bit of that respect. Now, what you do with the rest of that, or how you enhance that, it's up to you. Whatever. But John's a different character, man. He's like wine. Not everybody likes the sweet stuff or the hard stuff or the dry wine. Everybody has a taste, and John is that kind of taste. And John ran events, and I like that kind of taste, because he had the ability to run those events, and he put me in one of his events, and would love to have gotten into some other ones that he hosted and knew about. And so I always had a good relationship with John. I know people, he's weird, he's this. I said, yeah, I'm not going to sit there and challenge him.
I mean, they say that about Elon Musk. He's weird or whatever. The guy's a billionaire.
I was probably tough on him. I think about more when he did like play-by-play for the play-by-play where he talked about moves being sexy and stuff. He had a really weird way of like, oh, what a sexy transition. And you'd be going, I mean, I'm like 17 in the 90s. Like, I'm going, bro.
I'm with
like,
you there.
Okay.
I agree with you. No, that's good. It's just, I mean, I'm the type of guy, if you're my friend, you're my guy, you're my guy. Now, if you act stupid around me or doing those things when we're around, we're out, I'm like, hey man, chill on that stuff. I know that's you, whatever, but I know you're not that way. Let's knock that off. And John puts out some persona too. I mean, that's his thing, and I think now he's a little bit more bitter about it, because he's seen what MMA has become and what it has evolved to, and he wasn't able to cash in on it. He kind of passed him by, and the powers that be eliminated, whatever. And I'm sure John could tell you the story. Obviously he could tell you the story, but I don't know. But I respect for John. Gave me an opportunity to fight in one of his organizations, in one of his shows. Matter of fact, I was the only grappler. I think one of only one or two grapplers that won. I beat Toyoshi Kasaka in the contenders. But yeah, man, like I said, life's too short, man. I give you respect, and I'll let you bust your butt to lose that respect from me.
No, that's a good point.
I got the rules that you see now are because of some of the stuff he implemented early. And I think that's another resentment for his, like, hey, I'm going to come up with this stuff. Now you think I think the thing is they keep passing on who did it, who started it, to somebody else. And they've yet to come back to mention where it came from originally. And like rounds and gloves and such, I think, he was the matchmaker for UFC for a while as well. And I think, who would have known it? The Fajita brothers, like I was on a plane to Russia with Meyerowitz, and he just sat next to me. He's like, I just got tired of, he goes, I just couldn't afford it. And so he sold it for what, $2 million. But the Fajita brothers had a lot of trouble in the beginning, losing a lot of money. I mean, that's a lot of faith. What were they? $40 million in debt? I don't know. And they turned it around with, with the TV program they put on, and who knew that would be here now? I mean,
Yeah.
who knew? I mean, at first the states fought so hard to not
Hey,
have.
if you talk to John, John would tell you he knew.
Well,
Like,
no,
that's a joke. That's a joke. He's my guy. I just said nice things about it, but I'll go the other way with it too. But
I mean, as
John
much
would tell you he would.
I tell you, like here in Indiana, there used to be 262 shows a year. Since when the UFC came here, they thought they'd be coming here forever, and they started sanctioning it. I mean, I can't even tell you on one hand how many shows there are in Indiana. Maybe 10 a year, maybe. I go, these are 262, but they've regulated it so bad. People, you got to give them. I mean, it's not a moneymaker, and people don't want to do it. Go through all the licensing, everything. But it seems like all the states have for the UFC for it to survive, and it's a wonder it survived at all. But people now, there's no way. I mean, I don't see how this thing. You don't see UFC 1000 here in 10, 20 years.
We only got a few minutes left, and just because of when you guys fought, and you guys both came from wrestling, so I know mentoring and coaching is definitely part of your pedigree coming up through the sports. You see a young guy now that knows that you guys used to fight and wants to get into fighting. Like, what do you have to say to the future wannabe fighters, or the future fighters that want to get into the sport? What would you say to them?
Have an open mind, dude. Learn some skills. Learn jujitsu. I mean, I learned it on the fly. I kind of reverse it. I don't want to say reverse engineered it, but I did it backwards. And this is part of my kind of discussion with Joe Rogan. It was years ago. I don't even know if Joe even remembers it, but I used to get annoyed. He'd say, "That's an elite level wrestler, world class. This." And I'm like, dude, that's a good college wrestler. I mean, the difference in elite level and world-class level is guys make the adjustments. A good college wrestler, an elite level wrestler, will train with adjustments and a game plan. And a world-class wrestler will go with that same game plan, but when things go shitty, he makes the adjustment in fight, makes the adjustment, and capitalizes on it. That's a world-class fighter. An elite level guy is a guy that can stick with the game plan and be successful with that. But there's just different brands to it. But you do need to have a diverse background. And in saying that, like I said, I want to say I mentored Curtis Blades. I told Curtis, I said, man, don't forget you're a wrestler. I go, the best thing and the worst thing I ever did is I learned how to strike. I say I learned. I learned how to punch. I used to hit heavy. Gosh, I'd be big pillow. Boom, boom, blah. But now I learned the snap of the punch. My jab got to be really good, a good snappy jab, and had some crispness to my shots. And you know what? I started cutting corners. I mean, honestly, man, it was pretty cool. Knock somebody out. I mean, dang, how exciting is that? Pop! Oh my gosh, I knocked that dude out just hitting him once. Dude, I don't have to worry about wrestling. I don't have to worry about getting tired. I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. I just got to do it one time. And it was in the gym. I was sparring, and I dropped and knocked out my sparring partner. Got booted from that gym that day because I shouldn't have done it. I mean, I just kind of like, oh wow, this is cool.
Yeah,
I can do this. But learning how to strike and not falling in love with it. Learn the different arts is good. Wrestling. Look, I'm biased. Gary's going to be biased about wrestling. You love it. There's probably isn't a better one you could start with than wrestling. But you start with the great wrestling base, and then you work on your boxing and submission stuff. I mean, you do it in that order. The submission stuff isn't near as important unless you're fighting a submission guy, and then you're just going to specifically one off and train that way. But I think your transitions, your takedown transition, striking, takedown transition, striking, takedown transition to maybe submission and things like that would be really good. But like I said, I probably can echo what Gary's going to say in terms of I'll take a wrestling base, 7 days a week and twice on Sunday over any other skill set.
Let me just tell you what I'm seeing now. I've had more wrestlers on my wrestling team because my practices were too hard, quit, and go to the jiu-jitsu gyms and the boxing gyms. Like literally be on my wrestling team, and they literally quit. Would make the varsity team, but my practices were too hard. And I'm like, look, I tell their fathers, and I say something on Facebook, listen to me. You better have a wrestling base. That teaches you all about your balance and everything. Well, if you think you're going to go learn jiu-jitsu and do boxing, you're missing a crucial element, and that's wrestling. And I'm telling them, you're getting a free education right here with me. For 4 years, you're wrestling with me. It's a free education. You don't have to go spend hundreds of dollars a month to learn this stuff. But no, they'd rather spend hundreds of dollars learning in boxing and forget the key element of balance that wrestling teaches you, and the toughness, and the practices are brutal. That's it.
I think we're gonna have to end it on that, gentlemen. Again, I'm just gonna say, man, having you guys on here has been a pleasure for me, and something that I never expected to have the opportunity to do. Even though I'm 8 years into this podcast, I've talked to some big names, but you guys are the guys that got me into this. You guys are the guys that really helped shape my entire world as this being something that I could be around and be a part of, and just watch and enjoy. So from the bottom of my heart, I just want to thank you guys for what you guys have done, and the sacrifices you made. I know it didn't seem like much back then, but you mean a lot to a lot of us old school guys that this became our passion. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Yeah, that's the luxury of the people that have now today. There's been a path laid, right? And all the good things to do and the bad things to do to get rid of. We didn't have that path. It was just like, oh, you're fighting. All right, let's go fight. Get on a plane, go fight. I mean, now these guys, there's a game plan, there's gyms, they get it done right. That's why the guys are a lot better, let's say MMA-wise, but let me tell you, it's a different story back then. You know, Mike Tyson always said you get punched in the face. You know, you had a game plan to get punched in the face. How about if you get your head split wide open by a headbutt back then? What was your game plan?
These are martial artists. You guys were fighters. That's the difference. That's the difference. That's what I came up around. The early Tito's, the early Chuck Liddells. That's what all you guys were based on, but all with respect. In a violent sport where you're headbutting somebody, 90% of the time you guys got up, shook hands, had a beer after the fight, and it's what made this accessible to a normal person like me who's not a fighter, just somebody who wanted to be around it. So again, I just want to thank you. I don't know if you have anything to throw out. I know you're coaching at Duke. I know you got your coaching. Is there anything you want to throw out before we sign off here? Any sponsorship or anything you guys got to say?
No, I mean, I don't have any. I appreciate you guys having this old timer on, man. It's kind of cool to see how the sport's evolved. You know, I mean, I consider myself, you know, obviously a competitor. And now, as you obviously finished competing and stuff like that, and see how the sport has evolved. And I was there in the early part of when that sport was this level and stuff like that. So it's really cool, and I really appreciate you guys kind of, you know, digging out the cobwebs and shaking off the old binders and kind of finding out some information out about myself and Gary and things like that. But definitely really appreciate you kind of warming this old dude's heart, man. Definitely appreciate it.
Awesome, and I look forward to
You're
letting
welcome.
Dan know the words you had for that. Yeah, and awesome again. Fans can check out the show at Combat Hour on Twitter, Coast-to-Coast Combat Hour on Instagram. Follow me, Matthew Hawkins, at MMAHawk21 on Twitter and Instagram. Follow Ed at Carbazol on Twitter, Carbeerzol on Instagram, and Old Head Carb on Twitch. Thanks everybody for listening. Thank you for your time. Gary, go ahead.
I just want to say one last thing. Me and Tom Erikson on June 20th will be in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, inducting John Smith into the Hall of Fame, AAU Hall of Fame.
Awesome. Right. Awesome. Again, thank you guys. Thanks for everything. And maybe we can do this down the line again, because I have days and days of questions that
instead of letting me or Gary take over, just go ahead and grill us, man. I love talking some stories, like some fun stuff, some behind the scenes stuff that, you know, that happened to some fighters and stuff. I have a good Vanderlei Silva story you guys will love.
Oh, you should have said that at the beginning.
Let's end on that, because we can have a part two. And I would love to hear that, because again, Vanderlei is one of my.
Definitely.
Well, he was Alex Stiebling when Alex Stiebling was the Brazilian killer. And stuff like that, where he went down there, he had his Brazilian killer shirt on. Alex was the nicest kid. This kid was just wild, bug-eyed, and you know, he went down, had a great event down in Brazil, and then he was fighting over in Japan. And we were doing a transition. You fly into Narita, then go to Haneda, the different airport, to fly locally within Japan, so to speak, regionally, so to speak. And he's staring at Vanderlei Silva. Vanderlei Silva is looking at him, and Vanderlei Silva is an intense mother trucker. He just is. You guys know. And Vanderlei starts getting mad, and he starts screaming at Alex. And Gary Goodrich and I are there. I don't know if I'm fighting Gary or whatever. And so Alex has, who was it? Jeremy Horn, little Jeremy Horn with him. That's his backup. And Gary Goodrich and I both had to grab Alex and go grab Vanderlei and tell Vanderlei to shut the F up and sit down. He didn't mean any harm, blah, blah, blah. And Vanderlei's just in the shoot box team and Gary and I almost had to take on the whole shoot box team because Alex was staring at Vanderlei the wrong way. So we had to sit him down right by us wherever we traveled for the rest of the trip, stay by us so they wouldn't jump his little ass in a hallway because he was staring at Vanderlei, and Vanderlei did not like it.
So let me just say this. Stibling became famous because I turned down that fight, and it wasn't in Brazil. It was in Venezuela. He had fought 4 Brazilians that night and beat him in a tournament because I wouldn't get on the plane because it was after 9/11. I said, I'm not flying anywhere. And so I said, Stibling, you want to take my spot? Go ahead. And he did, and he won that night, and he goes to Pride, wins 4-6 fights against the Brazilians, and I made him famous, just so you know.
Yep. IVC 14 Venezuela, the first event IVC had with gloves on.
Yeah. Yep.
Awesome, gentlemen.
I know you guys are long on this and stuff like that. Definitely appreciate this and would love to kind of do this again if we can, whatever figure. I can get a little bit more technical quicker with my technical expert and stuff like that. But again, appreciate the time, and you guys have a great evening.
You too. Thank you. You guys laid the
Peace.
foundation of what the sport is. So we do really appreciate it. Thank you.
Nice.
See you guys.
Have a good night.